The classroom was unusually quiet that morning, the kind of silence that made even the smallest sound feel too loud. Sunlight streamed through tall, dusty windows, falling in pale stripes across worn wooden desks. At the back of the room sat Aisha, her shoulders slightly hunched, her hands folded neatly in her lap as if she were trying to make herself invisible. She was 13 years old, but her eyes carried a depth far beyond her years. Her blue dress was simple. No designer label, no bright patterns, just soft fabric, carefully stitched by her mother late at night after long hours of work. Every thread held love, hope, and sacrifice. Aisha had worn it proudly when she left home that morning, her mother smoothing the fabric and whispering, "Stand tall. You deserve to be here." But now, surrounded by rows of students who barely looked like her, that pride felt fragile. Whispers floated through the air like tiny stings. Some curious, some cruel. Aisha had learned to recognize the difference. She kept her eyes on her notebook, pretending to reread the same sentence again and again. Words blurred together as a familiar heaviness settled in her chest, the quiet fear of being noticed for the wrong reasons. Then she felt it, the teacher's gaze. Mr. Harlan stood at the front of the class, his chalk frozen midair. His eyes narrowed as they rested on Aisha, lingering far longer than necessary. There was no warmth in his expression, only judgment. He cleared his throat loudly, the sound cutting through the room. "You," he said sharply, pointing. "Stand up." Aisha's heart skipped. Slowly, she rose from her chair, her legs trembling despite her effort to remain steady. Every eye turned toward her. The silence grew heavier, pressing down on her like a weight she could barely carry. "What do you think you're wearing?" Mr. Harlan asked, his tone dripping with contempt. "This is a school, not wherever you came from." A few students shifted uncomfortably. Others looked away. No one spoke. Aisha opened her mouth, then closed it again. She knew better than to argue. She had learned early in life that sometimes, explaining yourself to people who refuse to understand only deepens the wound. "I followed the dress code," she said quietly, her voice barely above a whisper. Mr. Harlan scoffed. "That's what you think." Laughter rippled softly through the room. Aisha felt her face burn, but she lifted her chin, just a little. Her father's words echoed in her mind, "Never let them steal your dignity." She stood there, alone, in the back of the classroom, feeling small yet strangely strong at the same time. She didn't know it yet, but this moment, this silence, this injustice, was about to change everything. The air in the classroom felt heavier than before, thick with unease. Aisha was still standing when Mr. Harlan stepped away from the chalkboard. His shoes struck the floor with sharp, deliberate taps as he walked down the aisle, each step echoing in her chest like a warning. "Stay right there," he said coldly. Aisha didn't move. She clasped her hands tighter, her fingers pressing into her palms as if anchoring herself to the ground. Her heartbeat thundered in her ears, but she forced herself to breathe slowly. She could feel the eyes of her classmates on her, some filled with pity, others with uncomfortable curiosity. No one intervened. Mr. Harlan stopped in front of her desk and looked her up and down, his expression hard and dismissive. "You people always think the rules don't apply to you," he muttered, loud enough for the class to hear. Aisha flinched, the words cutting deeper than she expected. She wanted to speak, to defend herself, to explain that her family followed every rule, that her mother had triple-checked the dress code, that she had worked so hard to belong. But the words stayed trapped in her throat. Without warning, he reached out and grabbed the fabric near her shoulder. Gasps rippled across the classroom. "What are you doing?" someone whispered. Mr. Harlan tugged at the dress, pulling the seam sharply. The sound of tearing fabric was soft, but in the silence, it felt deafening. A small rip appeared, ugly and unmistakable. Aisha froze, shock washing over her like cold water. Her breath caught. That dress wasn't just clothing. It was her mother's love, stitched together after midnight. It was pride. It was dignity. And now, in one careless motion, it had been violated. Laughter broke out in the front row, quickly followed by uneasy murmurs. Aisha felt tears burn behind her eyes, but she refused to let them fall. Crying would only give him what he wanted. She stepped back slowly, creating space between them. Her hands trembled as she pressed them against the torn fabric, trying to hold herself together. Her chest tightened, not just from fear, but from the crushing weight of injustice. "I didn't do anything wrong," she said, her voice shaking but clear. For a moment, Mr. Harlan seemed surprised. Then his face hardened. "Sit down," he snapped. "And be grateful I don't send you to the office." Aisha remained standing. The room fell silent again. Even the laughter died. Something had changed. Her refusal to collapse under humiliation unsettled the room. She wasn't defiant, but she wasn't broken either. She looked around the classroom, meeting the eyes of her classmates one by one. Some looked ashamed, others looked inspired, even if they didn't yet understand why. In that moment, Aisha made a choice. She would not let this moment define her as weak. She would carry the pain, the shame, the anger, but she would not surrender her dignity. She stood tall, her torn dress a painful reminder of cruelty, but also a silent testimony to courage. And she had no idea that help was already on its way. The tension in the classroom was unbearable, like the moment before a storm breaks. Aisha was still standing when the sound of footsteps echoed down the hallway outside. Slow, steady, confident. No one paid attention at first, until the footsteps stopped directly at the classroom door. A soft knock followed. Mr. Harlan turned sharply, irritation flashing across his face. "We're in the middle of a lesson," he snapped. "Who is it?" The door opened anyway. A tall man stepped inside, dressed in a dark, neatly pressed suit. His posture was calm, his movements measured, but there was a quiet authority about him that instantly changed the atmosphere in the room. He scanned the classroom slowly, his eyes passing over the rows of students, then stopping on Aisha. Everything else faded. For a brief second, relief flickered across her face, followed by confusion. She hadn't expected him. He was supposed to be in court that morning. "Aisha," the man said gently. Her throat tightened. "Dad," she whispered. Mr. Harlan stiffened. He looked from the man to Aisha, clearly unsettled. "And you are?" he asked, though something in his tone had shifted, less arrogance, more caution. The man turned toward him. "Samuel Carter," he said calmly. "I'm here because I received an urgent call concerning my daughter." The name landed heavily in the room. A student near the window sucked in a sharp breath. Others exchanged glances. Even those who didn't fully understand knew instinctively, this was not an ordinary parent. Mr. Harlan's face paled almost imperceptibly as recognition dawned. Judge Samuel Carter, a federal judge, a name that appeared in newspapers. A man known for integrity, fairness, and an unshakable commitment to justice. The teacher swallowed. Judge Carter's eyes returned to Aisha. He noticed the way she was holding her dress, the tremor in her hands, the quiet strength in her posture. He didn't ask questions, not yet. He simply walked toward her and, without a word, removed his jacket. He placed it gently around her shoulders. The gesture was small, but it sent a ripple through the room. Aisha blinked hard, fighting back tears. The warmth of the jacket felt like protection, like home. "I'm sorry I'm late," her father said softly. "But I'm here now." Mr. Harlan cleared his throat nervously. "Sir, there's been a misunderstanding." Judge Carter raised one hand, not aggressively, but firmly. "I will speak with you shortly," he said. His voice never rose, yet it carried undeniable weight. "First, I want my daughter to sit." Aisha sat down, her legs weak but her heart pounding with a mix of fear and relief. Judge Carter turned to face the class. "What happens in a classroom," he said, "shapes lives far beyond these walls." No one spoke, no one moved, and in that moment, Mr. Harlan understood something too late. This was no longer about authority. It was about truth, and the truth had just walked in. The classroom felt impossibly still, as if time itself had paused. Judge Carter stood at the center of the room, his presence calm but commanding. He did not shout. He did not accuse. That silence, measured and deliberate, was far more unsettling than anger. Mr. Harlan shifted uncomfortably near the blackboard. The authority he once carried now seemed fragile, almost brittle. His eyes darted toward the students, then back to the judge, as though searching for a way out. "Sir," Mr. Harlan began again, forcing a thin smile, "this situation has been exaggerated. I was simply enforcing school policy." Judge Carter turned to face him fully. His voice remained even, but every word landed with precision. Policy does not give anyone permission to humiliate a child. A murmur rippled through the room. Several students straightened in their seats. Aisha sat silently, wrapped in her father's jacket, her hands resting in her lap. She watched, her heart racing, not with fear now, but with something unfamiliar, validation. Judge Carter gestured gently toward her. "My daughter followed the rules," he said. "Even if she hadn't, nothing justifies tearing her clothing, shaming her publicly, or speaking to her with contempt." Mr. Harlan opened his mouth, then closed it again. His face flushed. For the first time, uncertainty replaced his confidence. "You see," Judge Carter continued, "authority is not measured by how loudly you speak or how much power you think you have. It's measured by how you treat those who cannot defend themselves." The words hung in the air. A student in the front row lowered her head. Another clenched his fists. The room was changing, not through punishment, but through understanding. Judge Carter turned to the class. "Every one of you is watching," he said gently. "And every one of you is learning something today, about courage, about silence, and about responsibility." Then he looked back at Mr. Harlan. "What concerns me most," the judge said quietly, "is not the torn dress. It's the lesson you were about to teach, that cruelty is acceptable when it hides behind rules." Mr. Harlan's shoulders sagged. The truth had cornered him. He glanced at Aisha, really looked at her for the first time, not as a problem, not as a target, but as a child. I didn't intend," he started. "Intent," Judge Carter interrupted softly, "does not erase harm." Silence followed, heavy, honest. Judge Carter took a breath. "This moment doesn't have to end in disgrace," he said. "But it must begin with accountability." Mr. Harlan swallowed hard. Slowly, painfully, he nodded. "I was wrong," he said, barely above a whisper. Aisha felt a lump rise in her throat. Not because everything was suddenly fixed, but because the truth had finally been spoken out loud. And in that fragile, uncomfortable moment, something extraordinary happened. The classroom didn't feel like a place of fear anymore. It felt like a place where change had begun. The weeks that followed felt different, not just for Aisha, but for the entire school. The building looked the same from the outside, yet something unseen had shifted within its walls. Conversations were quieter, kinder. Teachers paused before speaking. Students watched more closely how words and actions could shape a person's sense of worth. Aisha returned to class wearing a new blue dress. This one had been bought, not stitched late at night, but she carried the old one folded carefully in her bag. Not as a reminder of pain, but as proof of how far she had come. When she walked into the classroom, heads turned. No laughter followed, no whispers. Instead, a few students smiled. One girl slid over to make space for her. A boy offered to share his notes. Small gestures, but meaningful ones. Kindness, Aisha realized, could grow quietly when fear was finally removed. Mr. Harlan was no longer teaching her class. In his place stood Mrs. Reynolds, a woman with gentle eyes and a steady voice. On her first day, she addressed the students openly. "A classroom should be a place where every child feels safe to learn," she said. "Respect is not optional here." Aisha felt her chest loosen, just a little. At home, her father watched her more closely than before, not out of worry, but pride. One evening, as they sat together at the kitchen table, he asked softly, "How are you feeling now?" Aisha thought for a moment. "Stronger," she said, "not because you came, but because I didn't disappear." Judge Carter smiled. He understood. True strength wasn't about who walked through the door to defend you, it was about who you chose to be when no one else spoke. At a school assembly later that month, Aisha was asked to stand on stage, not as a victim, but as a voice. Her hands shook as she stepped up to the microphone, but she remembered her mother's words. "Stand tall. I learned something important," she said, her voice steady. "Kindness isn't weakness, silence isn't dignity, and respect should never depend on how you look." The room erupted in applause. That day, Aisha walked home with her head high, sunlight warming her face. She knew the world wasn't suddenly perfect. Prejudice still existed, injustice still lingered, but she also knew this. One moment of courage could ripple outward, changing hearts in ways no rulebook ever could. As she folded her old dress that night, Aisha whispered a quiet promise to herself. to speak up when others couldn't, to protect kindness wherever she found it, and to never forget that dignity, once claimed, can never be torn away. And that was the lesson that stayed. Not fear, not shame, but hope.